Africa is not a place people associate with bears. When we think of African wildlife, we imagine animals built for heat, open landscapes, and constant movement. Bears don't fit that picture. They feel misplaced, almost impossible. But the fossil record tells a different story. Because buried beneath African soil are remains that don't belong to lions or hyenas or early humans. They belong to bears. Not modern bears, not recent ones, but bears that lived here millions of years ago, at a time when Africa looked nothing like it does today. These animals weren't visitors. They weren't experiments that failed quickly. They lived, adapted, and survived in African environments for long periods of time. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If Africa once supported bears, why are there none left today? To answer that, we have to look carefully, not at the Africa we know, but at the Africa preserved in stone. The presence of bears in Africa is not based on assumption or isolated finds. It comes from the fossil record. Bear remains have been recovered from African deposits dating primarily to the Miocene, more than 7 million years ago. These finds include teeth, jaw fragments, and limb bones, material that can be reliably assigned to the bear family, Ursidae. This matters because bears are not subtle animals in the fossil record. Their teeth are distinctive. Their limb bones are robust. When these elements appear together, misidentification is unlikely. The most notable of these African bear fossils belong to the extinct genus Agriotherium. Based on comparative anatomy, Agriotherium is classified within the bear family, but it differs significantly from most modern bears in structure and proportions. These fossils suggest an animal adopted for strength and power rather than speed. Its classification places it among the more specialized bear lineages that evolved during the later stages of the Miocene. Importantly, Agriotherium was not a brief or accidental presence. Its remains appear across multiple African sites and time layers, indicating established populations rather than isolated individuals. This suggests that bears were a recurring and sustained part of African ecosystems during this period. Africa did not merely receive bears once. For a significant span of prehistory, it supported them. Fossil material attributed to Agriotherium suggests an animal of remarkable size. Although complete skeletons are rare, the proportions of recovered limb bones and skull fragments allow reasonable estimates. These remains indicate a bear that was comparable to and likely larger than the largest living bears today, including brown and polar bears. Body mass estimates derived from skeletal scaling suggest individuals that may have exceeded 300 kilograms, with particularly large specimens possibly weighing more. This would have placed Agriotherium among the largest terrestrial carnivorous mammals present in Africa at the late Miocene. This size carried important implications. Large body mass reduces vulnerability to predation and allows dominance over food resources with limited effort. In prehistoric African ecosystems, an animal of this scale would not have needed to hunt frequently to survive. However, size also imposes constraints. Large animals require extensive territories and reliable access to food. They recover slowly from population losses and are less tolerant of rapid environmental change. The same physical traits that made Agriotherium formidable also made it dependent on stable conditions. Direct evidence of diet doesn't fossilize. What paleontologists rely on instead is anatomy, wear patterns, and ecological context. The teeth of Agriotherium are particularly informative. They include large canines and robust premolars capable of generating significant bite force. This dental structure is consistent with high levels of meat consumption, including the ability to process tough material such as bone. This suggests a feeding strategy that likely involved both active predation and scavenging. It is unlikely that Agriotherium was a specialized hunter. Its body proportions favor strength over speed, which implies it was better suited to overpowering weakened prey, displacing other predators from carcasses or exploiting animals already brought down. In Miocene and early Pliocene Africa, this would have provided access to a wide range of food sources. Likely prey would have included early bovids, primitive horses, and other medium to large herbivores common at the time. Juveniles, injured individuals, and carcasses left by other predators would have represented especially important resources. Unlike most modern bears, which rely heavily on seasonal plant foods, Agriotherium appears to have leaned far more towards carnivory. However, complete dietary specialization cannot be confirmed, and occasional omnivory remains possible. This feeding flexibility likely reduced risk in an unpredictable environment, but it also tied survival to the availability of large animals, a dependence that would become increasingly important as Africa began to change. There is no evidence that Agriotherium disappeared from Africa suddenly. The fossil record suggests a gradual decline, consistent with long-term environmental change rather than a single catastrophic event. From the late Miocene into the early Pliocene, Africa underwent significant climatic shifts. Paleoclimatic data indicate increasing aridity. Forested regions retreated, grasslands expanded, and once continuous habitats became fragmented. These changes altered the distribution and abundance of large herbivores, the primary food base for large carnivores and scavengers. For an animal of Agriotherium's size, this would have mattered. Large bears require extensive territories and consistent access to food. As productive environments broke apart, movement between resources became more difficult. Populations that were once connected would have become increasingly isolated. This isolation has consequences. Smaller populations are more vulnerable to local extinction, recovery slows, genetic diversity declines. Over time, even modest environmental stress can become unsustainable. At the same time, ecological competition likely intensified. As prey became less predictable, competition with other large carnivores would have increased. Agriotherium's size, once an advantage, may have become a liability in landscapes that could no longer support large, wide-ranging animals. Importantly, bears did not disappear globally at this time. They survived in other regions where conditions remained suitable. The disappearance of Agriotherium from Africa appears to have been regional, reflecting the continent's changing environments rather than a failure of the lineage itself. Eventually, Agriotherium no longer appears in African fossil deposits, not because Africa became suddenly hostile, but because it gradually stopped being forgiving. Long after Agriotherium disappeared from Africa, bears returned to the continent in a very different form. This time, they were not giants of deep prehistory. During the late Pleistocene, a subspecies of the brown bear, known as the Atlas bear, Ursus actis crowtherei, lived in the mountainous regions of North Africa. Its presence is supported by fossil remains and historical references that place bears in the Atlas Mountains thousands of years ago. Unlike Agriotherium, the Atlas bear was smaller, more omnivorous, and far more restricted in range. It occupied cooler, forested highlands rather than open lowlands, relying on mixed diets that included plant matter as well as meat. This bear did not dominate Africa. It survived at the edges. Its existence shows that Africa had not become entirely incompatible with bears. Instead, only certain environments, isolated, cooler, and resource-rich, could still support them. But this return was limited. The Atlas bear did not spread widely across the continent. It persisted in narrow habitats, already vulnerable to change. And unlike prehistoric bears, this bear lived alongside fully modern humans. That difference would matter, because while climate had shaped Africa slowly over millions of years, human activity shaped it far faster. The disappearance of the Atlas bear followed a very different pattern than that of Africa's prehistoric bears. By the time the Atlas bear lived in North Africa, Africa was no longer changing slowly. Humans were no longer a minor ecological presence, they were a dominant one. Historical accounts and archaeological evidence suggest that the Atlas bear survived into antiquity, possibly as late as the early Roman period.
Unlike Agriotherium, this bear lived in close proximity to humans who were capable hunters, organized and increasingly widespread. The pressure was direct. Atlas bears were hunted for food, killed to protect settlements, and captured for entertainment. Roman records describe bears being transported from North Africa to arenas, where they were used in public spectacles. These removals were not sustainable for a species already restricted to isolated mountain habitats. Habitat loss compounded the problem. Forests in the Atlas Mountains were steadily reduced through logging, agriculture, and settlement. As human activity intensified, the limited environments that could still support bears shrank further. For a bear population already confined to narrow regions, recovery became unlikely. Unlike the slow decline seen in prehistoric bears, the Atlas bear's appearance and disappearance appears to have occurred over a relatively short span of time. Within a few centuries, bears no longer appear in historical or archaeological records from North Africa. This time, there was no long transition. The pressure was too rapid, and when it ended, bears were gone from Africa entirely.